Welcome to part 2 of our study, the Quran and the Hadith. What do they really teach? The most holy book of the Muslims is the Quran. It would be equivalent to the Old Testament and the Gospels in the Bible. Second to that would be the Hadith. It would be equivalent to the epistles in the New Testament. The Quran is Allah speaking through Muhammad. The Hadith would be the explanations of what Muhammad taught based on the culture 1400 years ago. The Quran has many strange stories. One is in Surah 18, 9 through 25. It tells the story of a young man who went to sleep in a cave and then awoke 309 years later. In America we have a similar story, that of Rip Van Winkle, but he only slept for 20 years, and we know that story to be a fairy tale. In Surah 18:86, it mentions that when the sun sets in the evening, it actually sets in a muddy spring somewhere on earth. Again, this is an impossibility. And then we have what's known as the satanic verses. The Quran in Surah 53 verses 18 through 20 mention the 3 daughters of the moon god that the pagans worshipped. It says, "Verily he saw one of the greater revelations of his Lord. Have you thought of Elat, El-Uzza, and Manat, the third? The other..." and the rest of the verse is missing. In context today, it sounds like Allah is saying, do not pray to pagan goddesses for intercession. But in an ancient hadith, Taqra 1, Muslims claim this today to be a forgery, although it was not considered such for many centuries. Tabari gives us the entire story of what happened. Apparently, Satan tricked Muhammad into adding the following part of this verse. These are the exalted cranes whose intercession is hoped for. This was done in order to bring more people into Islam. Later Muhammad repented and took this out. It was never meant to say that Muslims worshipped these goddesses. The story simply teaches that Muhammad can be manipulated by Satan, which makes one wonder what other parts of the Quran are corrupted. According to the Hadith, here is the original verse. Verily he saw one of the greater revelations of his Lord. Have ye not thought of Elat, El-Uzza, and Manat, the third? These are the exalted cranes whose intercession is hoped for. The goddesses that the pagans worshipped were sometimes called cranes. Surah 265 mentions that Sabbath transgressors were turned into monkeys. In the Hadith, Bukhari 4:32 mentions the same Sabbath transgressors being turned into monkeys, and then in 5:24 it goes on to say, some Jews were turned into monkeys, pigs, and rats. So that we know this is not a mistranslation, proof is offered that rats will not drink camel milk, because some Jews were also turned into camels. In the Hadith, Bukhari 4:453, it states that Muhammad taught that Allah created Adam over 60 cubits tall. That's 90 feet. Today this would be a biological impossibility. And in Bukhari 4:516 and 1:462, it teaches that Satan sleeps in the upper part of your nose while you sleep at night. Again, to make sure we're translating Satan, nest, and nose properly, the story goes on to say that in the mornings you must wash your nose thoroughly to make sure Satan gets out. In the Hadith, Bukhari 1:345, it says that the angel Gabriel came with a knife and cut Muhammad's internal organs out and washed them in the brook of Zamzam, and then put them back in. This somehow gave the prophet great wisdom. Again, a biological impossibility. In the Hadith, Bukhari 4:537, the prophet Muhammad taught that you can drink water with flies in it, because even though one wing of the fly contains poison, the other wing contains the antidote. And the angel Gabriel supposedly explained to Muhammad that the reason why some babies look like their mother and some look like their father is based on which parent climaxed first during intercourse when the child was conceived. In the Hadith, Bukhari 5:235 and 236, Muhammad took his first wife Aisha when she was 6 years old. That could have just been an arranged marriage, but Aisha actually said she had her first intercourse with him when she was only 9 years old. He would have been in his mid-50s at the time. Even some Muslim countries would put people into prison for being a pedophile if they took the virginity of a 9-year-old girl. And this is supposed to be a great prophet of God? Aisha went on and stated that he was bewitched at times, and said things that are not true. Again, you have to wonder how accurate the Quran is, if he could be bewitched. This was Bukhari 7, 658. There are several places that describe Muhammad's revelations. The Hadith, Bukhari 116, 117, 1829, 495, 438, 461, and many other places, basically says Muhammad would hear a ringing in his ears, fall to the ground, shake, foam at the mouth, and begin snorting like a camel. In this state he would receive his revelations from God. The Old Testament rabbis and the early church fathers stated that no true prophet would have revelations like this. This is only what pagans do. And in Bukhari 6, 558, the prophet Muhammad would forget major portions of the Quran. So again, we have to wonder about the accuracy of the Quran. In Bukhari 128, Muhammad taught that hell is mainly populated by women. This might be in reaction to what Aisha said about him. And even though hell is mostly populated by women, you can help alleviate their suffering by putting palm branches on their graves. This almost sounds like an Islamic version of purgatory. In Bukhari 8, 794, Muhammad commanded his disciples to drink camel urine as a medicine. And in Bukhari 4, 283, Muhammad would preach under a date palm, and that date palm would weep and cry out while he was preaching. The prophet would then pet it to stop it from crying. It's also interesting to note that in the Hadith, Bukhari 5, 266, Muhammad stated that he was not even certain himself that he would ascertain salvation. In the Hadith, Bukhari 2, 167, it mentions that Muhammad was terrified by an eclipse. This is based on some Arab superstition, no doubt. Bukhari 163 mentions that Muhammad was a white man. This should really upset the Black Islam cult, or the Nation of Islam, who teaches that he was black. Bukhari 167 mentions Muhammad dyed his hair red. And in Bukhari 2, 122, 2, 141, 4, 744, and other places, he referred to Ethiopians as raisin heads and owned slaves. It seems very strange that in the United States, the black people who want to get away from the concept of slavery are embracing the Nation of Islam and Islam in general. They should be asking the question, when the Christians bought them as slaves 200 years ago, who did they buy them from? It was the Muslim slave traders. Even today we have the Muslim slave trade based out of Sudan and other Muslim countries. Bukhari 1, 812 says something very interesting. Muhammad stated that if you eat onions and garlic, you would have bad breath, and Allah would not hear your prayers. So let's recap some of the problems with the Quran and the Hadith. Men can sleep for 309 years. The sun sets in a murky pond at night. The 3 cranes, or daughters of Allah, can make intercession for us. Some Jews were turned into monkeys, pigs, and camels for breaking the Sabbath. Adam was created 60 cubits tall, or 90 feet tall. Satan sleeps in your nose at night. Muhammad had his internal organs cut out and put back in. Flies have poison on one wing and an antidote on the other. A child will look like the parent who climaxed first the night of his conception. Taking a girl's virginity at the age of 9 is a good thing. Muhammad could be bewitched at times and say things that are not true, and his visions were like an epileptic fit, and then he forgot portions of the Quran before it was written down. Hell is mainly populated by women. You know, the Bible says all have fallen short of the glory of God, men and women equally. But even though hell is mainly populated by women, putting plants on their graves can ease their suffering. Muslims should drink camel urine, and date palms can cry out until you pet them. And Muhammad said he may not even make it to heaven. We also learned that we should fear the eclipse of a moon. And slavery is okay. And then, of course, Allah will not listen to you if you have bad breath. I'm very thankful that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will hear my prayers even if I do eat onions and garlic. You need to consider all this inaccurate information and decide for yourself which one is the true religion, Christianity or Islam. You be the judge. Visit us at BibleFacts.org for the next video in this series.